On the outer fringes of the Xylos Nebula, where starlight struggled to pierce the cosmic dust, lay the Kryll Dominion. A species forged in the crucible of perpetual war, the Kryll were as formidable as they were humorless. Their bodies, encased in chitinous armor, reflected the cold metallic gleam of their warships, and their multifaceted eyes saw only strategic advantage or imminent threat. For generations, the Kryll had known only the harsh realities of survival. Every sunrise was a calculation, every interaction a potential battle. Their society, a rigid hierarchy of warriors and strategists, functioned with ruthless efficiency. Emotions were considered a weakness, individuality a liability. Currently, General Vorlag, a veteran of countless campaigns, stood on the bridge of the flagship Ironclad, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. Intelligence reports suggested an impending incursion by the Grolak, their sworn enemies. Vorlag had prepared meticulously. Every sensor array was calibrated, every squadron positioned, every contingency accounted for. Resistance, brutal and decisive, was the only acceptable outcome. Then, the unexpected happened. A blip, insignificant at first, appeared on the long-range scanners. A single vessel, unregistered, and emitting a chaotic jumble of energy signatures. It was approaching Kryll space at a leisurely pace, seemingly oblivious to the war preparations. Vorlag narrowed his eyes. A Grolak scout? Unlikely. Their tactics were far more sophisticated, far more predictable. This felt different. This felt wrong. Identify the vessel, he barked, his voice a gravelly rasp. The comms officer, a nervous Kryll barely out of his larval stage, scrambled to comply. Attempting to establish communication, General, no response. Energy signatures erratic. Design unknown. Unknown? Such a thing was unheard of. Kryll intelligence had cataloged every known species in the galaxy, every warship, every escape. Podger, this vessel defied classification. The vessel continued its advance, now within visual range. It was small, almost comically so, compared to the Kryll warships. A single bulbous craft, painted in garish colors that seemed to mock the Krylls. Utilitarian aesthetic. Vorlag's suspicion deepened. This was no mere scout. It was a provocation. A deliberate attempt to undermine Kryll authority. But by whom? And for what purpose? He activated the Ironclad's advanced surveillance system, a network of quantum entangled sensors designed to penetrate any form of cloaking or shielding. It was the pride of the Kryll fleet, a marvel of engineering, and as Vorlag was about to discover, hilariously inadequate for the task at hand. The system sputtered word and displayed a series of incomprehensible readings, energy fluctuations, gravitational anomalies, temporal distortions. It was as if the vessel was surrounded by a cloud of pure chaos. "Report!" Vorlag demanded, his patience wearing thin. The science officer, his eyes wide with confusion, stammered, "General, the readings are impossible. The vessel appears to be simultaneously emitting and absorbing energy, creating localized distortions in space-time. It's as if it's not even there." Not even there? Vorlag's mandibles clicked again, this time in disbelief. Was this some kind of elaborate illusion? A psychic attack? The Grolak were known for their devious tactics, but this was absurd. He ordered a full-spectrum scan, bypassing the automated systems and relying on raw data analysis. The results were even more perplexing. The vessel's hull was composed of ordinary alloys. Its propulsion system, rudimentary. Its weaponry, non-existent. The Kryll's high-tech surveillance systems, honed over centuries of warfare, were utterly useless against this anomaly. They could detect cloaked warships, phase-shifted fighters, even microscopic drones, but they couldn't make heads or tails of a brightly colored, seemingly unarmed vessel. As the vessel drew closer, a single message crackled across the comms channel. It was a garbled, heavily distorted signal, but the words, translated through the Kryll's universal translator, were unmistakable. "Greetings," the message said, in a tone that was almost casual. We come in peace. And also, we're kinda lost. Is this the galactic rest stop? Vorlog stared at the comms panel, his multifaceted eyes wide with disbelief. The galactic rest stop? Was this some kind of joke, a pathetic attempt at deception? He had prepared for resistance. He had prepared for war. He had not prepared for this. The Kryll general expected resistance, but found a welcome. Or at least, someone who was terribly lost and in need of directions. The situation was, to say the least, disconcerting. The boarding party, clad in full battle armor and armed with plasma rifles, marched through the breached hull of the human vessel. Every step echoed in the cramped corridors, their multifaceted eyes scanning for any sign of resistance. They moved with practiced precision, years of combat training dictating their every action. What they found, however, was not what they expected. Instead of a fortified command center or a squad of heavily armed soldiers, they encountered nothing. The ship was eerily quiet, the only sound the hum of its barely functional life support systems. Then they saw him, in what appeared to be the ship's recreational area. A lone human was lounging in a gravity chair, his feet propped up on a control panel. He was wearing a t-shirt with a picture of a smiling cat, and his hair was a mess. He didn't seem to notice the Kryll soldiers until they were practically on top of him. "Oh hey," the human said, finally looking up, a lazy grin spreading across his face. "You guys must be the, space cops?" The Kryll commander, a hulking warrior named Krill'tok, narrowed his eyes. "Identify yourself, human. State your purpose." The human chuckled. "Name's Jax. And my purpose? Well, right now it's mostly just trying to find a decent cup of coffee. This thing," he gestured to a contraption that looked suspiciously like a repurposed engine part, "makes something vaguely resembling caffeine, but it tastes like burnt socks." Krill'tok was taken aback. This was not the behavior of an enemy combatant. This was bizarre. "You are in violation of Kryll space. Your vessel is unregistered and your presence is illogical." Jax shrugged. "Yeah, well, space is big, you know. Easy to get turned around. And paperwork? Ugh, don't even get me started. Bureaucracy gives me hives." He scratched his arm for emphasis. One of the Kryll soldiers shifted nervously. Hives? Was this some kind of bioweapon? Krill'tok regained his composure. "Your levity is inappropriate. You will be detained and interrogated." "Interrogated, huh?" Jax raised an eyebrow. "Sounds kinky. You guys into that sort of thing?" The Kryll soldiers exchanged confused glances. Kinky? What did that even mean? Krill'tok's mandibles clicked in annoyance. This human was clearly trying to confuse them, to disrupt their mental discipline. "Silence!" he barked. "You will answer our questions. What is the purpose of your vessel? Who are your allies? What are your intentions?" Jax sighed dramatically. All right, geez. You don't have to get your chitin in a twist. Like I said, I'm just trying to find a decent cup of coffee, and maybe a working toilet. This thing's been clogged for 3 solar cycles." He gestured to a door labeled Head, which was leaking a suspicious green fluid. The Kryll soldiers recoiled, in disgust. Krill'tok struggled to maintain his composure. This human was either incredibly stupid or incredibly dangerous. He couldn't decide which was more unsettling. "You claim to be lost," he said, his voice dangerously low. "But we have detected unusual energy signatures emanating from your vessel. What are you hiding?" Jax blinked innocently. "Hiding? Nothing to hide, buddy. Unless you count my collection of vintage rubber duckies. Those things are worth a fortune, you know." He winked, and Krill'tok felt a shiver run down his chitinous spine. This human was mocking them. He was deliberately undermining their authority with his absurdity. "Search the vessel," Krill'tok ordered, his patience finally snapping. "Find the weapon. Find the source of the energy signatures. And restrain this buffoon." The Kryll soldiers, relieved to finally have a concrete task, fanned out across the ship. They searched every nook and cranny, their plasma rifles at the ready. Meanwhile, Krill'tok stood guard over Jax, his eyes never leaving the human's relaxed form. Jax, for his part, seemed completely unconcerned. He yawned, stretched, and then pulled out a small, brightly colored device from his pocket. "Mind if I play a little game while we wait?" he asked, tapping the screen. "This thing's got like 1,000,000 levels of Candy Crush." Krill'tok stared at the device, his multifaceted eyes wide with disbelief. Candy Crush. Was this some kind of code? A tactical simulation? He had prepared for resistance. He had prepared for war. He had not prepared for a human playing a mobile game while his ship was being searched by heavily armed soldiers. The situation was becoming increasingly surreal. This first contact was not going according to protocol. Not at all. The Kryll meticulously scanned the vessel, their advanced sensors pinging and whirring. In the ship's cargo hold, they discovered the source of the strange energy signatures, a metallic box humming with contained power. It was covered in odd symbols and blinking lights, clearly not of Kryll design. This, they deduced, must be the weapon. The box emitted a low, rhythmic pulse that resonated deep within their exoskeletons. Their instruments registered fluctuations in space-time, gravitational anomalies, and distortions of the electromagnetic spectrum. To the Kryll, these were undeniable signs of advanced, potentially devastating technology. Meanwhile, Jax, still lounging in his gravity chair, seemed utterly unconcerned. He idly flicked through channels on a battered datapad, occasionally chuckling at something he saw. He might as well have been watching reruns on a lazy Sunday back on Earth. Back in the cargo hold, the Kryll technical team began their analysis. Using complex algorithms and multi-dimensional calculus, they attempted to decipher the device's function. They ran simulations, cross-referenced data with their vast archives of known weaponry, and consulted with their most brilliant strategists via secured comm channels. The calculations were baffling. The energy readings fluctuated erratically, the symbols defied translation, and the device's purpose remained stubbornly obscure. They hypothesized that it could be a phase-shifting weapon, a gravity disruptor, or even a device capable of manipulating the very fabric of reality. Each possibility was more terrifying than the last. As the Kryll scientists struggled to understand the alien technology, the box began to whir more loudly. A nozzle extended from one side, and a beam of shimmering energy lanced out into the air. The Kryll soldiers scrambled for cover, bracing for an explosion or some other catastrophic event. But nothing happened. The energy beam dissipated harmlessly, leaving behind something. It was a small, intricately detailed object that slowly materialized from thin air. It was a replica of a Kryll battlecruiser, perfectly formed down to the smallest rivet. The Kryll stared at the miniature ship, their multifaceted eyes wide with confusion. What was this? A taunt? A symbol of defiance? Or something far more sinister? The device hummed again, and another object began to materialize. This time, it was a small, brightly colored flower, its petals unfurling in a simulated breeze. Then came a miniature statue of a Kryll warrior, striking a heroic pose followed by a rubber ducky. Back in the recreation area, Jax stifled a yawn. "Oh yeah, almost forgot about that thing," he said casually, as if reading their minds. "It's just a souped-up 3D printer. I use it to make, well, whatever I feel like, really. Keeps me from getting bored on long trips." A 3D printer? The Kryll exchanged bewildered glances. This incredibly dangerous, reality-bending weapon was a glorified toy? It was simply not possible. Their entire understanding of warfare, of technology, of the universe itself was being challenged by this absurdity. Krill'tok approached the cargo hold, his mandibles clicking with barely suppressed frustration. "Report!" he barked. "What is the purpose of this device?" The lead scientist, his exoskeleton trembling slightly, stammered, "Sir, we are still analyzing the data, but it appears to be some kind of manufacturing unit. It creates objects from raw energy." "Manufacturing?" Krill'tok echoed, his voice laced with disbelief. "What kind of weapon creates trinkets?" "We are unsure, sir," the scientist replied. "Perhaps it is a form of psychological warfare, a way to confuse and demoralize the enemy." Krill'tok considered this. It was possible. This human, with his bizarre behavior and his ridiculous contraptions, could be attempting to undermine their mental fortitude. But the idea seemed far-fetched, even for a species as illogical as humans. He turned his gaze back to Jax, who was now juggling 3 of the miniature Kryll battle cruisers. The human grinned, a mischievous glint in his eye. Krill'tok couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something, that there was a deeper layer of meaning hidden beneath the surface of this farce. But what that meaning was, he had no idea. Emboldened, Jax took his improving spree to the next level. He started with the Krill's brutally uncomfortable metal chairs, which seemed designed more for torture than for relaxation. One by one, he replaced them with plush, ergonomically designed recliners that he printed out of a newly synthesized polymer. The Kryll soldiers, used to Ramrod's straight posture, eyed the chairs with suspicion, unsure if they were some kind of trap. Next came the art. The Kryll base was a study in sterile functionality, devoid of any aesthetic appeal. Jax, with a flourish, began adorning the walls with vibrant, abstract paintings, sculptures of bizarre alien creatures, and even a few holographic landscapes of Earth sunsets. The Kryll, whose artistic sensibilities were limited to schematic diagrams and battle plans, were utterly bewildered. They stood before the artworks, their multifaceted eyes darting back and forth, trying to discern some hidden strategic purpose. But the pièce de résistance was the beverage dispenser. Jax, noticing the Krill's monotonous diet of nutrient paste, decided to introduce them to the wonders of earthly beverages. He rigged up a machine that could synthesize an endless variety of drinks, fizzy sodas, fruity juices, and even the occasional alcoholic concoction, all dispensed with the push of a button. The Kryll, accustomed to only water, approached the dispenser with extreme caution, unsure if the colorful liquids were poisonous or some form of bioweapon. The Kryll command structure was in an uproar. Krill'tok paced his command center, his mandibles clicking with mounting frustration. "What is the meaning of this interior decoration?" he demanded of his advisors. "Is this some kind of elaborate prank? A subtle form of sabotage?" One of his advisors, a particularly nervous Kryll named Zithtar, ventured a hypothesis. "Perhaps," he stammered, "the human is attempting to soften us, to lull us into a false sense of security with these comfortable objects. It is a classic tactic of psychological warfare." Another advisor, a grizzled veteran named Krill'tok, scoffed. "Nonsense, the human is clearly insane. He is simply scattering random objects in the hope that we will become confused and disorganized. He is either a genius or an idiot, and I am leaning towards the latter." Krill'tok glared at them both. "Enough. Whatever the human's motives, we cannot allow this absurdity to continue. We must determine the true purpose of these improvements and neutralize the threat before it is too late." But as the Kryll tried to unravel the mystery of Jax's bizarre behavior, a subtle shift began to occur. Some of the younger soldiers, weary of the rigid discipline and the monotonous routine, found themselves drawn to the colorful artworks and the comfortable chairs. They began to spend their off-duty hours lounging in the new recliners, gazing at the strange paintings and even tentatively experimenting with the beverage dispenser. A few even started to smile, a phenomenon previously unknown among the Kryll. Military. Days turned into weeks, and the Krill's attempts to decipher the 3D printer's signals grew increasingly desperate. Their finest cryptographers worked around the clock, feeding the data into their most powerful computers. But the results remained frustratingly inconclusive. The signals seemed to shift and change, defying any logical pattern. Finally, a breakthrough. A young, unusually perceptive Kryll technician, poring over the data streams, noticed a recurring sequence, a complex series of geometrical patterns interwoven with numerical codes. She cross-referenced the sequence with a database of known alien languages and, to her astonishment, found a partial match. "General Krill'tok," she announced, her voice trembling with excitement, "I believe we have deciphered a portion of the human's weapons signal." Krill'tok, his multifaceted eyes narrowed with anticipation, leaned closer to the holographic display. "Report!" he barked. The technician hesitated for a moment, her mandibles clicking nervously. "The signal, it appears to contain blueprints." A collective gasp swept through the command center. Blueprints, plans for weapons of unimaginable power. Krill'tok felt a surge of grim satisfaction. He had been right all along. The human was a threat, a cunning adversary who had been attempting to lull them into a false sense of security. "Display the blueprints," he commanded, his voice ringing with authority. The technician manipulated the controls, and a series of images flickered onto the screen. The Kryll officers stared in stunned silence, their multifaceted eyes wide with disbelief. The blueprints depicted food. Not weapons, not bombs, not insidious devices of psychological manipulation, but food. Elaborate, intricate designs for dishes they had never seen or imagined. Towering cakes with layers of frosting and fruit, steaming bowls of aromatic soups, succulent roasts of unknown meats, and shimmering glasses filled with colorful, effervescent liquids. Krill'tok was speechless. He stared at the images, his mandibles twitching in confusion. "Food," he croaked. "But why?" The technician swallowed hard. "The blueprints," she said. "They are recipes. Instructions for creating culinary experiences." A wave of horrified realization washed over the Kryll officers. The strange objects Jax had been printing were not weapons, but meals. The comfortable chairs, the colorful paintings, the beverage dispenser. They were all part of some bizarre, incomprehensible form of hospitality. The Kryll, a species that viewed sustenance as a purely functional necessity, were utterly dumbfounded. The idea of creating food for pleasure, for enjoyment, for art, was completely alien to them. Krill'tok sank into his command chair, his multifaceted eyes clouded with confusion and dismay. He had prepared for war, for invasion, for a desperate struggle for survival. He had not prepared for this. This is madness, he muttered. Utter madness. The news spread like wildfire through the Kryll ranks. The human wasn't a warrior, a saboteur, or a spy. He was a chef, a culinary artist. The very notion was absurd, yet the evidence was undeniable. Jax, meanwhile, was oblivious to the existential crisis he had triggered. He hummed cheerfully as he unloaded a freshly printed device from the 3D printer, a molecular gastronomy kit, complete with edible foams, spherification tools, and flavored air diffusers. "All right, who's ready for a taste of molecular marvels?" he asked, flashing a disarming grin. A few brave, or perhaps simply hungry, Kryll soldiers cautiously approached. Jax, with the enthusiasm of a seasoned showman, began to demonstrate the art of spherification, transforming a nutrient paste, the Kryll's staple food, into shimmering caviar-like orbs. The first Kryll soldier tentatively popped one of the orbs into his mouth. His multifaceted eyes widened in surprise. The familiar, bland taste of nutrient paste had been transformed into an explosion of unexpected flavors, sweet, tangy, and slightly spicy. He swallowed, then reached for another orb, and another. Within hours, the Kryll base had been transformed into a bizarre culinary laboratory. Soldiers abandoned their posts, drawn by the irresistible aroma of exotic spices and sizzling proteins. The mess hall, once a sterile and functional space, was now a riot of color and activity, as Kryll lined up to sample Jax's latest creations. General Krill'tok watched the scene with a mixture of bewilderment and mounting horror. His meticulously planned defense strategies were crumbling before his eyes, replaced by a food festival. He approached Jax, his mandibles twitching with barely suppressed frustration. "Human," he growled. "Explain yourself. What is the meaning of this culinary chaos?" Jax, unfazed, wiped his hands on his apron and grinned. "Relax, General," he said. "I'm just introducing you guys to the concept of cuisine. You know, food that actually tastes good? Food that's fun?" Krill'tok stared at him, his multifaceted eyes narrowed in disbelief. Fun? Food is not meant to be fun. It is meant to provide sustenance to fuel our bodies for war. Well, yeah, Jax replied, but it can do that and be delicious too. It's like a 2-for-1 deal. Trust me, General, once you've had a perfectly seared foie gras with a black truffle reduction, you'll never look at nutrient paste the same way again. Krill'tok recoiled as if he had been struck. Foie gras? Truffle reduction? These words, they mean nothing to me. They are decadent, unnecessary. Jax shrugged. Maybe, he said, but they're also incredibly delicious. And who knows? Maybe a little decadence is exactly what you Kryll need to loosen up a bit. The general wrestled with the implications of this culinary invasion. On one hand, the disruption of his military discipline was unacceptable. Soldiers were neglecting their duties, morale was plummeting, and the entire base was teetering on the brink of anarchy. On the other hand, he couldn't deny the undeniable. The food was good. In fact, it was unlike anything he had ever tasted. The flavors were complex, the textures were surprising, and the overall experience was pleasurable. And he had to admit the soldiers seemed happier. They were laughing, talking, and even cooperating. Was this victory or utter defeat? Krill'tok decided to conduct an experiment. He gathered his senior officers and led them to the mess hall, where Jax was preparing a particularly elaborate dish, a towering stack of pancakes drizzled with maple syrup and topped with a mountain of whipped cream. Officers, Krill'tok announced, we will sample this human concoction and determine whether it is a threat to our society or simply a culinary curiosity. The officers exchanged nervous glances, but dutifully lined up to receive their portions. Krill'tok took a bite of the pancake, his multifaceted eyes widening in surprise. The sweetness of the maple syrup, the fluffiness of the pancake, the smoothness of the whipped cream. It was an explosion of sensations unlike anything he had ever experienced. He swallowed, then took another bite, and another. Soon, he was devouring the pancake with the same gusto as his soldiers. When he finally finished, he wiped his mandibles with a napkin and cleared his throat. Well, he said, that was unexpected. The Kryll High Command convened in emergency session, holographic projections flickering with the grim faces of admirals and strategists. The debate raged for hours, the central question echoing through the chamber: what to do about the human and his food? Some argued for immediate termination. The disruption to Kryll society was simply too great. Others saw an opportunity. Productivity had surprisingly increased. Soldiers were more alert, more engaged, and less likely to engage in ritualistic mandible sharpening during downtime. Finally, a consensus emerged, driven by cold, hard logic. The human, announced the Grand Admiral, his voice echoing through the chamber, has proven beneficial. His culinary creations have improved morale and efficiency. Therefore, we will adapt. The decree was swift and absolute. Jax was officially declared a cultural ambassador, a title that even he found vaguely amusing. The final scene unfolds in the Kryll base's newly renovated mess hall. Gone were the sterile metallic surfaces, replaced by cozy booths, soft lighting, and even plants. A Kryll soldier, clad in full battle armor, sits alone at a table. Before him rests an elaborate dish, a deconstructed sushi roll, complete with miniature rice sculptures, edible seaweed art, and a delicate soy sauce reduction. He examines the dish with a critical eye, his mandibles twitching slightly. This was new. This was different. He cautiously picks up a rice sculpture with his clawed hand, brings it to his mouth, and hesitates. For generations, Kryll soldiers had consumed nutrient paste, a bland, utilitarian substance designed for maximum efficiency. This was something else entirely. He closes his multifaceted eyes and takes a bite. The flavors explode in his mouth. Savory, sweet, tangy, and umami, a concept previously unknown to the Kryll. He chews slowly, savoring the experience, his hardened warrior's face softening with something akin to pleasure. A small smile plays across his mandibles. Perhaps he thinks there is more to life than war. Perhaps there is room for flavor. A new era had dawned for the Kryll, one where discipline and deliciousness could coexist. Years passed. The Kryll culture underwent a seismic shift, a fascinating blend of their innate militaristic discipline and Earth's culinary madness. Drill formations were now accompanied by synchronized knife skills, and strategic planning sessions often paused for mid-morning tea breaks. Jax, of course, was loving it. He became a bona fide celebrity, his face plastered on Kryll propaganda posters, albeit with a chef's hat photoshopped onto his head. He advised the Kryll on the finer points of interstellar cuisine, lecturing on the proper way to pair nebula wine with grilled asteroid slugs. Whispers began to circulate of potential diplomatic missions, built not on trade or treaties but on food. Imagine a Kryll delegation presenting a meticulously crafted sushi platter to a species of sentient fungi, or Earth diplomats offering a perfectly brewed cup of coffee to a hive mind of insectoids. The possibilities, as Jax often said, were endless. And who knew? Maybe, just maybe, the galaxy could be united, not through conquest, but through a shared love of a good meal. After B, all everyone's gotta eat, right? Even grim militaristic aliens with a newfound appreciation for a well-placed sprig of parsley.